We are underway. Once again, as Captain Tab mentioned, my name is Lars, and I'll be your tour guide for the next hour or so as we make this 8.5 mile lap here around Elliott Bay. A great trip for you planned today. Lots to see. Might even get a little authentic Seattle weather. We haven't had rain in like 50 days. It says at some point today it's supposed to sprinkle a little bit and then get nice sort of the rest of the weekend. So we'll see what we get here in the next hour or so. But regardless of the weather, like I said, we have a ton to see and a great trip for you planned today. A little bit about myself before we get going. I've lived here in this area my whole life, grew up just across the water, and I've worked here at Argosy Cruises for 6+ years now. So this is actually my 7th summer working here. I've taken about 2,000 laps at least around the bay, and love it every single time. Something new to see each and every time, and I'd just love to share some of the history and things around here. Enough about me. Let's learn a little bit about you folks. Do we have any first timers to Seattle?
Yeah.
Half of you? Okay, everybody on this side. Anybody that's been here before? And any locals? 2 people in front to keep me honest. A couple more back there as well. Very cool. You can be the fact checkers today. Well, wherever you are coming from, once again, welcome to Seattle. Welcome aboard the Spirit of Seattle. And as we get going here, we're going to be going along our central waterfront for the next 10 or 15 minutes. So everything you're going to see is going to be off to the right side of the boat. And then we're going to make a big turn and head back down south a little bit later on. We'll have a really nice broadside view of the skyline at that point. As we get going though, we're leaving Pier 55. That's actually been the home to Argosy Cruises for 72 years now. And for much of those 7 decades, we've been doing this 1-hour harbor tour. Of course, a lot has changed over those 7 decades. And one of the newest things you're going to find here in Seattle, down on our waterfront, is the Seattle Great Wheel. Pretty hard to miss down here on our waterfront. It stands at 175 feet tall over here at Pier 57. And when it was built back in 2012, it was the tallest wheel of its kind in the United States. And then Las Vegas found out and built that one that's like 2 or 3 times bigger than this one. But this is still pretty cool. In fact, there is one special gondola, and that's about the 9 or 10 o'clock position. It's that all black one. And you might be able to notice the floor is actually glass. Kind of cool for you thrill seekers. It's super low tide. You could actually be about 200 feet off of the water if you're up there at the very, very top, looking down through your feet at everything that's down below. Now, if you are afraid of heights, plenty of other fun things to do down on our waterfront. If you've got a city pass, which I'm sure quite a few of you do, definitely check out the Aquarium. This has been one of my favorite spots since I was a little kid. My mom used to take me here as much as possible because this is a really cool spot, especially if you do have kids with you today. Really cool kind of research educational based facility in a place that you're not going to find any performances of any kind, no seals singing karaoke or anything like that. What you will find though are some light up and touch tanks, really cool for the kids. You can stick your hands in there and touch everything that's inside. There's also this underwater dome you can walk inside of. You're surrounded by about 400,000 gallons of water and fish and other marine life swimming around your head. So it does make it feel like you're underwater. In addition to that, they have some of the cutest creatures in the sea, which are the sea otters, of course, as well as some of the smartest creatures you'll find out here, and that's the giant Pacific octopus. This is the largest species of octopus in the world, and ones that you can see up close and personal right over there at the aquarium. I think they've sort of gained popularity in the last year or so, ever since that My Octopus teacher. Now, this is the #1 most visited spot here in Seattle, the #1 tourist destination. That being said, this is not a tourist trap. This is a really important part of our city and has a real rich history. This is actually one of the oldest continually operated farmers markets in the United States. So you can come in here any day of the week and check out the fish market and the fish toss. You can go get some local produce, flowers, whatever it may be. There's really kind of something for everybody up there. A couple different breweries as well as a lot of restaurants as well. One more thing you'll find up there that everybody kind of associates with Seattle is Starbucks. The oldest Starbucks location can be found right up there at Pike Place. Now, if you don't care too much about the oldest Starbucks, but you need your cup of coffee like first thing in the morning, you get the caffeine in your system, I would just tell people to just find the line coming out of that Starbucks and walk about a block in any direction. You'll end up at another Starbucks or another coffee shop with probably about a quarter of the line. That seems to be the busiest coffee shop here in town, but plenty of other places around here. Yeah, good call. All right, now something that we haven't seen too much here in Seattle over the last, I don't know, 20 months or so are these enormous cruise ships here in town. Obviously, the cruise industry was hit just about as hard, or if not harder, than just about anybody else during the pandemic. town once again. Seattle, believe it or not, is the busiest cruise ship port on the west coast of the United States, and the second busiest in the U.S. altogether. Now, this is actually pretty remarkable considering that our cruise season out of here in Seattle isn't very long. The only place that these cruises go to is Alaska. But not a lot of people like to go to Alaska on a boat in the middle of December. So this cruise season really is just from the late spring through the summer and into the early fall. In a typical year, we'll see about 230 cruises leave from here in Seattle. This year, it sounds like there's 89 scheduled departures, and these really just kind of started about a week or so ago. We'll kind of continue through the middle part of October. But actually, this Norwegian Encore, this enormous vessel off to our right, is the largest cruise ship we'll see here in town this year. This is the 14th largest in the world. It has everything from that big water slide up on top, back kind of near the middle of the ship, looking out over the edge, to an enormous go-kart racetrack on top as well. If you do a little Google on this boat, you can see just how many amenities are on there. It's like a big floating city or amusement park. I don't even know what you would call it, but these things are absolutely massive, as you can tell. We'll go by one more cruise ship port at the north end of the bay, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those when we do. Now, just beyond the bow of the Norwegian Encore, you can see Seattle's most iconic hotel, and that's the Hotel Edgewater. It's got all the white chairs out there on the balconies, and then the big red E's on top of it. Now, this hotel was built for the World's Fair back in 1962. This is a huge deal here in Seattle. The fair lasted 6 months, brought a ton of people through town during those 6 months, and 0 people actually ended up staying at this hotel. And that's because construction delays pushed back the opening until 2 weeks after the fair was over. They sort of underestimated how hard it was to build a luxury hotel out over the water. So unfortunately, they lost out on a lot of money during those 6 months. And once they finally opened their doors, like I said, 2 weeks after the fair was over, they had to find a way to make sure all these rooms were occupied as much as possible. So they put ads out in all sorts of different places, including travel magazines, obviously, wedding magazines, and most importantly, hunting and fishing magazines. They were advertising the unique ability to fish off your balcony or out of your bedroom window from your spot there at the hotel. And this, as you can imagine, brought a lot of people through the doors. In fact, this became too popular because people were actually catching fish and then realizing, my hotel room or freeze it in here. So they would just leave it in the bathtub or in the sinks or underneath the beds. So by the 1980s, housekeeping had been complaining on such a regular basis that management just decided, all right, we can't let people fish here anymore. It's just costing too much to clean up these rooms. So unfortunately, you can no longer fish there at the Edgewater. But actually, 2 years after the hotel opened, back in 1964, the Beatles came through town on their first world tour, and they actually stayed there at the Hotel Edgewater. If you Google Beatles Seattle, the first picture that's going to come up is a picture of them leaning out of their bedroom window with fishing poles in hand there at the hotel. Really one of the most iconic shots in the history of Seattle, and a really cool pop culture moment for the Edgewater as well as the city of Seattle. In the years since, a lot of other famous rock bands have stayed there at that hotel. Now, speaking of pop culture, one last pier we're going to see here on our waterfront is Pier 70. It's red and gray in color. And if you remember that MTV series, The Real World Seattle, about 20-some years ago, it's obviously here in town. If you recognize that pier, you may watch the show because the people on that show lived right there on Pier 70. Now, you're not technically allowed to live on this pier. The Rainier reputation is thanks to our other mountain range, which is out to the east. Once again, you're probably not going to be able to see it today, but later on, you can get a glimpse. Cascade Mountain Range runs north and south down the middle of our state. It's taller than the Olympics, and it traps these clouds over us here in Seattle, leaving that remaining moisture to be dropping over our city. So Seattle's in the top 5 for most rainy days and most cloudy days. We just don't get a lot of rain on those rainy days. That makes any sense. I could have saved about 2 minutes by just saying Seattle is the produce out of the grocery store. allowed that to get another pro sports team here in Seattle. Just about 10 days or so ago, they had the expansion draft, so the Kraken went from 0 players to 30 players in a matter of about an hour and a half. They picked off 1 player from each other NHL franchise, and he could sound. A lot of times people are curious, like, what makes a sound a sound? A sound is basically just a body of water with 2 or more openings to a larger body of salt water. So Puget Sound opens up to the north through 2 straits, kind of around Vancouver Island. That goes out to the west a little bit and eventually meets up with the Pacific Ocean. So today we're not technically out on the ocean, but this is a big inland body of salt water in here called Puget Sound, and really a unique body of water as well. First of all, it's got 292 different islands out here throughout the sound. Some of them have no residents, others have several thousand residents. In fact, Bainbridge Island, you can see just out there to the west. It's really everything between like our 2 and 5 o'clock position right now. This is going to be one of the largest and most popular islands here in the Sound, and that's where we're going to see a lot of these Washington State ferries going back and forth. How they work, first of all, they basically have these walls on either side which are hollow, and then there's valves down below. They can open up these valves, basically flood the structure with water. It sinks down below the surface. You can only see kind of the top couple feet of the walls on either side sticking out of the water. Then they basically position a ship in the middle, like the Cape St. George you can see there, put it onto some keel blocks to stabilize it, and fall that water out, and the boat's lifted up out of the water. So reasons for this, first of all, pretty tough to weld underneath a ship like this, as you're seeing right now. When the boat's down in the water, a lot easier to just pop it out. In addition to that, all Coast Guard inspected vessels, including this one you're on today, need to be up out of the water once every 2 years for like a routine kind of inspection. Also, repainting your boat's a lot easier when it's up out of the water than down in the water. So you'll see 3 of them in here today. Actually, I will just mention real quick, don't mean to make you turn around too much, but in dry dock number 3 there's the Uss Gabrielle Gifford. This is the one with the trimaran hole underneath. And this is a littoral combat vessel. These things are super interesting. It's built back in 2017, but it's meant for going really fast in fairly shallow water. It can travel up to about 47 knots, which is roughly 55 miles an hour or so, basically at freeway speeds. So that's like 5 times faster than the top speed we've gone today at any point. And it's only got about a 14-foot draft, so it allows it to go in fairly shallow water. So really kind of interesting vessel. Once again, the USS Gabrielle Gifford. It's got maybe one of the craziest looking bows I've ever seen. Almost looks like something out of Star Wars. We're not able to see that from here, but if you Google it, some pretty cool pictures you'll find as well. I did say that I'd tell you a little bit about some wildlife. I mentioned the giant Pacific octopus earlier. You can find those right out here in Puget Sound, and this is the largest species of octopus in the world. Other things that you'll find, though, include salmon. We have 5 of the 6 species of salmon in the world right here in Puget Sound. We have seals and sea lions. We also have harbor porpoise, which are like our Puget Sound dolphins, more or less. Almost looks like a compressed version of a dolphin, or like a combination of a pig and a dolphin, sort of a little bit shorter and squattier, but we'll see those in pods of 3, 4, 5 sometimes. In addition to that, we also have 3 resident pods of orcas here in the Sound. About 75 orcas in those pods all together through the J, K, and L pods. But these orcas in particular are different than all other orcas around the world for one main reason. And that big thing is they don't eat marine mammals. So they don't eat seals or sea lions or other whales or sharks or anything like that. They just go after fish. So many salmon throughout this area, throughout the course of history, that they haven't really needed to learn how to go after seals. Now the seals actually can tell the difference between these pods and the transient orcas that come in here from elsewhere from time to time. And they can tell the difference by the calls and the sounds that they make. So anytime they hear these transient orcas coming in, the seals in this area will be getting up out of the water however they can, whether it's onto the beach or on the docks or a paddleboard or the back of a boat, they will. But when the resident orcas are here in this area, the seals really aren't bothered at all. So I think it's kind of cool how these different species interact in these different ways. One more note about the orcas. There was one kind of iconic, legendary orca that passed away just a couple years ago. She was part of the J pod, but her nickname was Granny. Called her Granny for a good reason. Orcas live 50 to 60 years on average, and Granny was an estimated 105 years old when she passed away. actually first estimated her age back in the 1950s, based off the size and age of her young back then. And like I said, I think she passed away back in like 2018, so pretty good run for home crane. Alright, if you've been in Seattle for more than about an hour and a half, you've realized that the entire city is like one huge hill. The one flat spot you'll find here in town is directly off to our right. This is a man-made island called Harbour Island. So this is created by the Army Corps of Engineers back 100 plus years ago. And actually when it was built, it was the largest man-made island in the world. Since then, a ton of others have surpassed it in size, but this is a really, really important part of our city to this day. Now this is where you're gonna find these enormous container ships. And before I talk about them, I do want to just mention these cranes we have up here on the docks. And I'll start by telling you about the ones way out in the distance, about at our 3 o'clock position. On the other side of Harbour Island, you can see 4 white cranes way out there. Those actually arrived in Seattle about 3 weeks ago, standing upright as you see them on top of a ship, and they came from China. So that's how they get there, fully assembled over in China, and then shipped across the Pacific, standing 4 at a time on top of one of these ships. It's not, you'd think they just use like the IKEA method of bringing home a box and assembling it once you get it home, but no, this is how they do it. Apparently it makes it a little bit easier, and basically it appears on our waterfront. But somebody with MTV found this loophole in the system and decided they were going to call it a 24-hour-a-day recording studio that these folks just happen to spend like all their time at. So that's how they were able to pull it off. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's truly no reason to go back and watch that show. And I think if you watch the show, you can probably agree with me on that. All right, we're getting our closest view of the Space Needle right now, so feel free to get those cameras out and snap a few photos. We'll talk a lot more about the Space Needle as well as some of these other buildings once we can kind of see the entire skyline out on the other end of the bay. In the meantime, though, we'll just point out this park we have off to our right. This is the Olympic Sculpture Park. Don't need to make you turn back too much, but kind of tucked in behind Pier 70 are a few more sculptures. And this is run by the Seattle Art Museum. So this park is free to enter and check out some of those sculptures inside of it. And it'll be open really anytime during daylight hours. And that leads into Myrtle Edwards Park just ahead of us. And I really think this is kind of the most underutilized stretch here in Seattle, especially by visitors. A lot of people come to Seattle, they're hanging out downtown amongst all the concrete and whatnot, and don't realize that within walking distance of where they are, they can get right down here to the waterfront where there's no real buildings or anything. You can look out over the water. If you're looking to go for a morning run or bike ride or jog, this is a really awesome spot to do so. I will just also mention that probably the 2 best beaches near downtown Seattle are right kind of scattered throughout Myrtle Edwards Park. And I think that really goes to show a lot about the beaches here in Seattle. This isn't necessarily a place a lot of people come to go lay out on the beach or anything like that. That being said, there are 2 beaches within about 20 minutes or so of downtown that would be worth a visit if you're looking to get out to the beach. One of them is directly out to the left, way out in the distance. That point that comes out there is the end of West Seattle. It's called Alki Point and Alki Beach. It's probably the most famous beach around. Really nice sandy area with some shops and restaurants kind of lining the road that comes right behind. In addition to that, one more beach up to the north is called Golden Gardens Park, Golden Gardens Beach. Once again, probably 20-25 minute drive out that way. Another nice long sandy beach. So if you are looking to get out to the beach for like around sunset, anytime around there, those are 2 really good options for you. Now I will just mention one thing. You're probably not going to want to swim in this water. I know it's supposed to be pretty nice this weekend, but even though this is the hottest time of the year, this water is not going to get too much above 50 degrees. Puget Sound stays between about 42 and 52 degrees on average year round. We even had the hottest day in the history of Seattle at about 109 degrees this time last month, and still, once again, that water didn't get too much above 50 degrees. So not a lot of people are going to spend too much time in this water. If you are looking to cool off, go for a swim. Go over to Lake Union, Lake Washington, or Lake Sammamish. That water warms up quite a bit more. I was over swimming in Lake Union yesterday, and the surface temperature is like 75 degrees, so a lot more comfortable. You can also rent paddle boards and all kinds of stuff over that way as well. Now during the tour, I always like to point out a couple different neighborhoods, and the one that I think is always most important to talk about is Queen Anne Hill. Queen Anne neighborhood is up and off at about our 2 o'clock position. It's this big hill with the towers on top of it. here in Seattle, one of the most historic. There's a bunch of really cool old homes on top of the hill as well. Main reason I pointed out though is because up there on the hill is a park called Cary Park. Anybody been to Cary Park? A couple people over here. Thumbs up. Kind of cool. Yeah, so the park itself is kind of small, but it offers that iconic view of our skyline. So if you've ever got a postcard of Seattle, you probably have the Space Needle right in the middle, looking like the tallest building, and then everything else sort of set back behind it. That's only kind of a perspective you can get from up there at Cary Park. Another reason I mentioned that area is because a couple famous TV doctors lived up there. Dr. Fraser Crane from Frasier and Cheers. He supposedly lived in a high-rise apartment, like right where that middle tower is. Unfortunately, the apartment doesn't exist. In fact, only one episode of that show is actually filmed here in Seattle. The rest is just down at a Hollywood set. But one more show that was actually based here in this area, I guess still is based in this area. It's on its 195th season. That is Grey's Anatomy. I think it's actually more like 13. I don't know. 16? 18? Does anybody know? Okay, we'll go with 18. Now, I don't obviously know too much about the show. I'll leave that for my sister. But actually, just across the street from the Space Needle is a building called Cuomo Plaza. And in real life, it's a news station. In the show, it's what they use for the exterior shots of the hospital. So, if you are a fan of the show, like I said, just across the street from the Space Needle. Where I was going with this before is Dr. Meredith Grey also lived, or lives, up there near Queen Anne Hill and Cary Park as well. Correct tide, they just slide it off onto the dock. These are called Gantry Cranes. It just takes one person to operate a crane like this, and they sit underneath that boom up there. You can see the glass box with the cables hanging down to a little claw down below. You can pick up one of these containers and move it every 60 to 90 seconds or so. So roughly about 1 a minute from the dock to the boat, or from the boat to the dock. Really efficient at their jobs. And they do work sort of an interesting schedule. These crane operators, first of all, this is like the most coveted job in the Longshoremen's Union. They'll work for 20 plus years just to get an interview to be one of these crane operators, but they're making 6 figures, and it's a really, really lucrative gig. But they do work an interesting schedule, as I mentioned. They'll work 2 hours up there in the crane, 2 hours down on the dock, and then 2 hours up there in the crane again. And the reason for that break in the middle is they're actually really susceptible to issues like vertigo, depth perception issues, and dizziness. If they're looking down through that window at their feet for hours on end, that can throw you off a little bit, especially with considering like how hard they're concentrating. So it's important they take that break in the middle, reset, and then get back to work. Now these container ships, once again, I believe the MSC there is right about 1,000 feet long, and then the one just ahead of it is about 1,100 feet long. So once again, these would be the tallest buildings here in Seattle. That 1,100 foot long ship out there in the distance probably has about 6,500, 7,000 containers on it. You may be thinking there's no way. That's what I thought when I first heard that figure. But for every one you see up above, there's one more down below in the hull of the ship that you're not necessarily able to see. Allows it to be a lot more stable going across the open water. Not to shift gears too quick, but if you look out in the distance, once again about our 3 o'clock, coming to our 4 o'clock position, way out above the containers, you'll see the Starbucks World headquarters way out there. There's an American flag on top of the building. Yeah. So probably about our 4 o'clock position, and then you'll see the familiar Starbucks logo looking back at you. Now, one last quick story about these container ships themselves. I'm confident telling you this now because we are a ways away from that ship, but these containers do fall off from time to time. About 1,500 containers a year will fall off into the water worldwide. 1,500 seems like a lot, but I just told you that there's maybe 7,000 on that ship alone, so really just a tiny fraction of 1% of the containers shipped on a yearly basis. So when it happens, it doesn't ever really make the news, except for one time in particular. Back in 1992, one of these things was crossing the Pacific, encountered a storm, lost a couple containers, and a little while later. All right. Do we have any folks from the Midwest on board? Originally, at least a couple people. Yeah, Denver, close enough. I don't know. Just off to our right, this big white structure over here is our grain terminal, and this is our big economic connection to the Midwest. All this grain, for the most part, that comes through here, not necessarily grown out in this neck of the woods in Western Washington. Most of it's grown and harvested out in the Midwest, shipped across the country by rail, comes to this facility here, and then they basically just loaded up the conveyor belt across the boom, and then down into the hull of a ship that would be waiting here to take it basically across the Pacific and over to Asia. So we export more grain than anything else here in Seattle by volume. So this is considered our biggest export by volume. Doesn't make any sense to me, we don't grow it here, but that's what it's considered, biggest export by volume. Not our biggest money maker though. Any guesses as to what generates the most revenue here in Seattle?
Fish.
Tourism, that's the first one I always get, and that's way up there. Coffee, that's a good guess as well. Boom, airplanes. Airplanes are airplane parts. Boeing got it started here a little over 100 years ago, and is still one of the largest employers you'll find here in the state. I mentioned Starbucks earlier. We'll actually see their world headquarters a little bit later on. In addition to that, Microsoft, Amazon, Costco, all headquartered in this area too. One more company is Expedia. Expedia's world headquarters are what you see directly off to your right. That white and gray business complex over there is the new home of Expedia. They bought this facility about 3 or 4 years ago. $225 million. They poured several more $1 million into it to renovate it and expand it. Late 2019, early 2020, they were about to move about 10,000 employees from over in Bellevue down here to the north end of Elliott Bay. And then a pandemic hit and everybody started working from home. So slowly over the last month or so,